I didn't notice the champagne pyramid or the string quartet when we stepped into the hotel ballroom. What gripped me was the whisper that moved like a draft along the back of my neck, followed by the click of stilettos that sounded too familiar. I saw the hair first, those careful golden curls, then the tilt of a chin that dared the room to look away. The dress came into focus a second later, a midnight blue sheath with a narrow satin belt, the very one Marcus once called unforgettable on our 7th anniversary. My hand found the small white envelope inside my clutch, an anchor, more than a weapon, steadying the tremor building in my chest. I could taste the scent of my own perfume, gardenia and cedar, trailing on someone else's skin. And that's when the ceiling lights felt a shade brighter than they were a moment ago. Before I go on, tell me where you're listening from in the comments, and if this kind of true family story keeps you company at night, tap like and subscribe so you don't miss the next chapter. Justice has a quiet voice, but it carries farther when we share it. My name is Elaine, and I turned 42 the week the leaves finally gave up their color along the boulevard. I advise first-generation students who remind me of the young woman I once was, hopeful, stubborn, and willing to hold 2 jobs if that's what it took. I grew up in a house where dinner meant everyone at the same table, and apologies were spoken out loud, not implied. My mother kept the mortgage paid on a small bungalow in Oak Cliff and taught me to iron a blouse and stand my ground in the same afternoon. Marcus breezed into my life when I was 23 and balancing night shifts at a bookstore with morning classes. A man who could turn a room with a handshake and a plan, who tipped well and remembered the names of every cashier on our block. He said ambition could be holy if it lifted both of us, and I believed him enough to hold my career back a step while he earned his MBA and to cheer every promotion like we were the ones crossing a finish line. When my mother died, I sold the bungalow she fought to keep and set the proceeds aside for a future we sketched on napkins, down payment tuition, a safety net we promised only to touch for family. We bought a home on a quiet street where the neighbors decorated together at Christmas, and our daughter Molly learned to ride her bike going downhill, squealing at the wind like it was a new friend. I packed lunches and wrote notes on napkins. Marcus learned how Molly liked her pancakes, then forgot some weekends because business trips stacked up like magazines on a coffee table. We saved for a backyard deck for college funds for a trip to Yellowstone we postponed twice because timing matters in finance, and as he said, the next rung would set us up for life. I told myself success had seasons and that this one belonged to him because the next would belong to us, and on most days, I believed it enough to feel settled. When the phone spent more time face down, I told myself privacy mattered. When a customer's perfume followed him home on a Tuesday, I told myself proximity lingers. Serena, who has known me since the days we split a single plate of nachos in college, once said that most marriages fray along edges so slowly you don't hear it until a thread snaps. I heard it on a Sunday soft as a sigh when Marcus called from Houston, but the traffic behind him had the gravelly sound of the tollway I take to campus. I let it pass because Molly was building a fort in the living room, and the smell of chili was rolling out of the kitchen like a memory. A week later, Serena sent a text that sat unread for a full minute while I set the table, 3 photos taken from the sidewalk outside a restaurant in Uptown. A familiar profile, leaning toward a woman with a laugh you could hear even through glass. I didn't reply right away because naming something makes it real, and I needed a little more time in the room where my daughter's crayons were scattered and the dog was asleep, where the world felt ordinary and safe. In our house, we kept promises by writing them down on paper budgets, summer plans, the list of places Molly wanted to see before she turned 12. The envelope in my clutch was paper too, a different kind, stark and heavy, the kind that says a person has stopped asking and started deciding. I had an invitation to Marcus's office gala taped to the fridge and a dress bag hanging from the closet door. Not the midnight blue, but something that fit my skin like a decision I'd already made. I wasn't walking into that ballroom to raise my voice or stage a scene. My mother didn't raise me to confuse dignity with noise. But I understood something as the week turned toward Friday. Sometimes the only way to be heard is to let silence do the speaking and to place the right document in the right hand at the exact right moment. I dabbed perfume on my wrists and thought about Oak Cliff, about the bungalow we lost, and the future it bought, about the night I told Marcus we were a team and believed it like a psalm. Molly fell asleep on my sister Jenna's couch while we braided her hair and watched a movie we'd both seen before, and the quiet in Jenna's living room sounded like safety. I left early to meet Marcus at the hotel, to do what wives are expected to do when a man works hard, and the company celebrates smile nod, fill the space beside him. The elevator ride felt long enough to count the beats of my heart and steady them. And when the doors opened, the music swelled like a curtain call, and the whisper found me again. I took one step, then another, and tightened my grip on the little white envelope. The ballroom quieted, as if the string quartet had missed a note, though they played on without falter. I felt every pair of eyes draw toward me, then shift toward Marcus, and then back again to the woman standing across the room. Tessa Lane walked as though the floor had been set just for her, her champagne flute swinging like a pendulum that marked the seconds until impact. My throat tightened when the glow of the chandeliers landed on her dress, midnight blue satin, with the same belt Marcus once said only I could carry. A ripple of whispers moved through the crowd, some sharp enough to sting, others low enough to curdle. Marcus followed my gaze, and the false warmth drained from his face. His hand found my arm with a desperate squeeze. "Elaine, don't," he muttered, but I pulled away before he could finish. The words echoed louder in my head because they said everything he wanted from me: silence, obedience, invisibility. Tessa reached us her perfume, a mix of vanilla and wine, and her smile sharpened like glass. She tilted her chin toward me, her eyes scanning up and down my figure as if she had already won. Imagine that she said, her voice sweet but meant to cut. "We share the same taste." I steadied my breath, careful not to let her see the tremor in my hands. "No coincidence," I said calmly. "That dress was mine first, and you know it." The gasps around us prickled across my skin. Marcus shifted, trying to wedge himself between us, but I stepped forward. "Marcus once told me it was unforgettable," I added, raising my voice, so the circle of co-workers, associates, and their families could hear. He swore no one else would ever see me in it. My words landed heavier than I expected, drawing out phones and sideways glances. The space turned from a party to a stage, and Marcus looked like a man cornered by his own lines. Tessa's fingers touched Marcus's sleeve as if she were claiming property, and my chest surged with heat I hadn't felt in years. My palm rose before I even knew what I was doing, and the crack of the slap carried farther than any note from the string quartet. Marcus's head snapped to the side, his eyes stunned wide, his lips parted but silent. I leaned close, not whispering, but delivering words only he was meant to feel. "You humiliated me in front of everyone I know," I hissed. "Tonight, you get to burn." My clutch opened with a steady hand, and the white envelope slid free. I pressed it to his chest, and he fumbled to hold it. "What is this?" he stammered. "Open it," I said, my voice strong enough to carry. "Read it aloud if you dare." He didn't. His face fell pale because he already knew. The weight of my attorney's letter sat in his hand, proof that I had stopped waiting and started moving. The whispers around us grew louder, shifting from curiosity to realization. Tessa pulled back her hand from his sleeve, the confidence draining from her as the crowd closed in. "Enjoy your party," I said, straightening my shoulders. "It's the last one you'll ever host with my money by your side." Then I turned toward the exit, each heel striking the marble like a stamp of finality. I didn't hurry. I wanted them to see the walk deliberate and proud. Behind me, Marcus's voice cracked the silence. "Elaine, wait." But I didn't turn back. I pushed through the ballroom doors into the cool Dallas night, my breath sharp in the air, my pulse a storm beneath my skin. I stood on the sidewalk, skyscrapers glittering above me, and whispered the truth to myself. This wasn't the end. This was only the beginning. The next morning, I woke, not with regret, but with clarity. My head throbbed with the weight of what I'd done, yet my chest felt lighter than it had in years. The silence of the house was broken only by the sound of the zipper on the duffel bag I laid open on the bed. I folded clothes for Molly, tucked away our birth certificates, and placed a box of keepsakes inside the small treasures I couldn't leave behind. Each piece I packed wasn't an escape, it was a declaration. I dialed the bank before noon. Every joint account we held was familiar to me, the numbers marked in my memory from years of balancing budgets while Marcus climbed ladders. I moved half into an account under my name, only the half that was legally mine. Then I froze the credit cards, imagining his expression when they declined at some restaurant meant to impress her. The thought didn't bring joy, only justice. By early afternoon, I sat across from a lawyer in a downtown office, my palms resting flat on the desk to steady myself. I want a divorce, I said, my voice clear and steady. He leaned back, measuring me with a quiet look, but I didn't let silence linger. I slid my phone across the desk. Serena's photos waiting on the screen. I have proof. That night, Marcus finally returned home. His tie loose, his skin drained as if the day had aged him 10 years. He stopped cold when he saw the half-empty closet. "What is this?" he demanded, his voice cracking with disbelief. I folded Molly's sweater and placed it into the bag without looking up. "It's called leaving Marcus. You should recognize it. You've had plenty of practice." He ran a hand through his hair, pacing across the carpet. "Elaine, you can't do this. We need to talk. We can fix this." I laughed, the sound foreign even to my own ears, sharp and dry. "Fix this. You paraded your mistress in my dress in front of your entire office. You've been lying for years. There's nothing left to fix." His jaw clenched as he shot back. "You're overreacting. Think about Molly. Think about our family." I looked up finally, my eyes locking onto his. I am thinking about Molly. That's why I won't let her grow up watching her father gamble away everything for his ego. She deserves better. His lips parted, but no words followed. He looked smaller in that moment, shrunken beneath the weight of the truth. I pulled the copy of the attorney's letter from my bag and placed it on the counter. "You'll get served soon," I said, my tone even. "Don't worry, it's all in writing." His face drained again. "You spoke to a lawyer?" "Of course I did," I replied, lifting the duffel onto my shoulder. "Did you think I'd keep pretending, waiting for you to come home with excuses written in lipstick?" He tried to step toward me, but I raised a hand. "Stay back, Marcus. Every step you take from now on, remember, I'm already 10 steps ahead." My keys clinked in my grip as I walked past him out into the night. My heart raced like I had leapt from a cliff, but my feet stayed steady, each step firmer than the last. For the first time in years, I wasn't the one left behind. I was the one leaving, and Marcus was just beginning to realize he had underestimated the only person who knew exactly how to dismantle him piece by piece. And as the door shut behind me, I understood one thing clearly. He thought money was his weapon, but it was about to become his downfall. The morning after I walked out with my duffel bag, the silence of my sister's guest room felt heavy, but strangely safe. Molly slept curled against me, her small hand resting on my arm, her breathing even and steady. I lay awake long after dawn, staring at the faint light pressing through the blinds, knowing this was the first of many mornings we'd face without Marcus under the same roof. It didn't feel like freedom yet. It felt like standing barefoot on the edge of a cold floor, steadying myself before I took the next step. By the third day, reality settled in. I couldn't just hide in Jenna's spare bedroom while the world carried on. Molly needed stability, and I needed to face the consequences of the choices I'd made. I took her to school myself, walking her into the building and watching her join her classmates with a brave little smile. She didn't ask about her father, not directly, but I could see questions in her eyes that she was too young to put into words. That silence was harder than any argument Marcus could throw at me. Back at the house, Marcus left messages that shifted in tone with every hour. The first few were full of anger, his voice raised, demanding explanations. By evening, they turned into pleas. "Elaine, please, we can work this out. Don't drag Molly into this." His words scraped against me, pulling at the years I'd spent believing in the man I thought he was. I didn't answer. I knew if I heard his voice directly, I might waver, and I couldn't afford to bend now. Jenna tried to distract me with small things, meals at the kitchen table, walks around the block, helping Molly with homework while I sat nearby. At night, after Molly was asleep, Jenna would sit across from me with a mug of tea. "Are you holding up?" she'd ask gently. My throat tightened every time. I'd nod, but tears burned behind my eyes because the truth was complicated. I wasn't broken, but I wasn't whole either. I was somewhere in between, learning how to breathe again, without his shadow filling the room. Serena came by one afternoon, her camera bag slung over her shoulder, as if she'd been in the middle of a shoot. She wrapped me in a hug that smelled faintly of coffee and hairspray. "You're stronger than you think," she whispered before she even sat down. Then she pulled out her phone and slid it across the table. More photos, Marcus and Tessa, at a restaurant, her hand on his chest, his laugh careless. "I thought you should see these before they come to you, some other way," Serena said. My stomach twisted, but I didn't cry. I only nodded. Proof didn't hurt anymore. It clarified. At night, I lay awake listening to Molly's soft breathing, the occasional hum of Jenna's fridge, and my own restless thoughts. The weight of years pressed down the dinners I ate, alone the excuses I accepted, the inheritance I poured into Marcus's dreams. I remembered the blue dress hanging in the back of my closet, the one he had promised no one else would ever see. I could still hear the crack of my palm against his cheek in the ballroom, sharp as thunder. That sound replayed in my mind, not with regret, but with a strange kind of justice. By the end of the week, Marcus appeared in person. He showed up outside Jenna's house after dark, pounding on the front door, until David went out to face him. I watched from the upstairs window, Molly clutched against me, her wide eyes fixed on the sound of her father's voice. "Elaine, please just come outside. We can talk," he shouted. His face looked different, drawn, frantic, the calm veneer stripped away. David stood firm, his voice low but clear. "You need to leave Marcus, or I'll call the police." Marcus paced the sidewalk, running his hands through his hair, muttering words I couldn't hear. Finally, he stormed off his car, engine roaring into the night. That scene replayed in my head long after he was gone. Molly fell asleep eventually, but I lay awake staring at the ceiling. For so many years, I had been the one waiting at home, counting the minutes until Marcus returned from some late meeting or trip. Now the roles had shifted. He was the one outside in the dark, desperate for answers I refused to give. It should have felt like victory, but it felt like grief, too. The following days brought more cracks in Marcus's carefully crafted image. A former colleague of his, someone I barely knew, sent me a message on social media. "I saw what happened at the gala," she wrote. "I'm sorry. People at the office are talking, and it's not looking good for him." I read the message twice, my hands trembling, realizing the circle of whispers was widening. Marcus had always thrived on appearances, but appearances were starting to betray him. One afternoon, I picked Molly up from school and stopped at the park. She swung on the monkey bars while I sat on a bench, the sun warming my shoulders. Out of nowhere, she climbed down and sat beside me. "Mommy," she said quietly, "why doesn't Daddy come home anymore?" My chest ached, but I wrapped my arm around her. "Daddy made choices that hurt us," I said gently. "So for now, it's just you and me." She leaned against me, her small body warm and trusting. "As long as we're together, it's okay," she whispered. Tears slipped down my cheeks before I could stop them. That night, I scrolled through Marcus's voicemails, listening to his voice crack and falter. "You're ruining me, Elaine. Please don't let this end like this. I'll do anything. Just talk to me." I deleted the messages one by one, my thumb steady on the screen. It wasn't me ruining him. It was his own choices unraveling the life he built. For the first time in years, I wasn't the one holding everything together. I was letting it fall, and he was the one left scrambling. The quiet suffering wasn't just in sleepless nights or hidden tears. It was in the restraint I held when every part of me wanted to scream. It was in the way I smiled for Molly when I felt hollow inside. It was in the way I folded laundry in Jenna's guest room, as though it were my own home, reminding myself this was temporary. But within the ache, a new kind of strength was growing. Every silent tear was turning into resolve. I began to realize that Marcus wasn't just losing me. He was losing the stage he'd built for himself. His colleagues, our neighbors, even his own family were starting to distance themselves. And while he unraveled publicly, I was beginning to stitch myself back together privately. My suffering was still there, but it was no longer weakness. It was fuel, and I knew it was only a matter of time before my quiet resolve would become something sharper, something that could no longer be ignored. The days that followed Marcus's late-night visit outside Jenna's house carried a strange stillness. The storm I had been holding back for years was finally out in the open, and with it came a kind of raw clarity. I no longer questioned whether I was imagining things or if I was being too harsh. The doubts that had once wrapped around me like chains were gone. I could see my marriage for what it was, a stage he had built on my sacrifices, and a stage I no longer intended to stand on. That week, I met with my attorney again, sitting across his polished desk with a folder of documents I'd been quietly gathering for months. Bank statements, travel receipts, credit card charges, all the little trails Marcus had left behind. While thinking, I wasn't looking. My lawyer, Mr. Grant, studied them carefully, adjusting his glasses as he flipped through each page. "You've been thorough," he said, at last, his voice calm but firm. "This will matter when we talk custody and assets." Hearing those words steadied me. For so long, Marcus had made me feel small. Now I held proof that his actions were bigger than any excuse he could invent. At home, Molly sensed the change too. She still asked fewer questions than I expected, but her eyes followed me with trust. When I told her we would be moving into a smaller place soon, she didn't flinch. "As long as we're together," she said, curling against my side. That single line became the compass I carried into every meeting, every decision. I wasn't just doing this for myself. I was doing it for her to give her a home where she wouldn't have to wonder why her father's car wasn't in the driveway again. Marcus, on the other hand, grew more desperate. His messages piled up long, rambling voicemails filled with promises to change pleas for just one conversation and bursts of anger when I didn't respond. I blocked his number, not out of spite, but because every word felt like an attempt to reel me back into his orbit. It was silence, not shouting, that gave me power now. He had never known how to handle silence, and watching him unravel in it was almost more telling than any fight we had ever had. It wasn't long before whispers began circling back to me. A colleague of Marcus's, someone I barely knew, reached out quietly. She mentioned seeing him bring Tessa to a company dinner months earlier, long before I had proof. I didn't know how to tell you, she admitted, her voice hushed, even over the phone. But people are starting to talk. I thanked her without anger, only with the steady understanding that the truth had a way of surfacing when the time was right. Marcus's empire wasn't built to last, and the cracks were showing. Jenna watched me closely during those weeks, sometimes catching me staring out the kitchen window long after the dishes were done. One night, she poured me a glass of wine and set it on the counter beside me. "You don't have to carry it all at once," she said softly. "Take it one piece at a time." I nodded, grateful for her quiet presence, but inside, I knew this wasn't just about carrying pain anymore. It was about refusing to let him shape the story of our lives any longer. The turning point came at a dinner Serena invited me to. She insisted it would just be a small gathering, her husband, and a few friends. I almost said no, worried about whispers following me into every room, but something inside me pushed to go. I arrived wearing a simple black dress, nothing flashy, just mine. When the conversation drifted toward work and family, Serena gently placed her hand on mine, grounding me. "You don't owe anyone explanations," she said. "You get to decide what's next." In that moment, I felt the shift fully take hold. I wasn't the woman holding her breath anymore. I was the one deciding when to speak and how. Marcus tried once more to catch me off guard. He showed up at Molly's school during pickup, waiting near the parking lot, as if he could still stake a claim to our lives. When I saw him, my stomach tightened, but I kept walking. "Elaine," he called out, his voice loud enough for others to hear. "We need to talk for Molly's sake." I stopped just long enough to look him in the eye. "For Molly's sake," I said steadily. "I'm keeping her away from this chaos. Don't show up here again." My words landed heavier than I expected, not just for him, but for myself. I realized then that every time I stood firm, I was reclaiming the ground he had taken from me. That night, I folded Molly's laundry and felt something I hadn't in years: peace. Not joy, not celebration, but peace. I could hear Jenna and David laughing softly in the living room, Molly's voice mixing with her cousins as they planned some imaginary adventure. The sound didn't feel like a reminder of what I had lost. It felt like a promise of what was possible, of a life no longer tied to Marcus's lies. The next morning, I woke with a certainty that surprised me. I no longer felt the pull of doubt, the urge to check my phone, or the ache of waiting for his apology. I was done waiting. The silence I had once feared now wrapped around me like armor. For years, I had thought of myself as powerless, caught in the shadows of his choices. But as I watched the pieces fall into place, documents prepared, custody plans taking shape, whispers spreading on their own, I realized I had more strength than I ever imagined. My awakening didn't come with fireworks or grand gestures. It came with quiet clarity, with a steady voice that finally sounded like mine. And as I closed the folder of documents one last time before handing them fully to my attorney, I knew the course was set. Marcus had written his own downfall with every lie, every late night, every receipt he thought I'd never find. I was just the one finally ready to put the pieces in order. And as I stood at the window that evening, watching rain fall against the glass, I knew there would be no turning back. The time for silence had passed. The time to act had begun. The first time I heard that Marcus's card had declined, I wasn't even there. A mutual friend sent me a text in the middle of the afternoon. "You won't believe this. His corporate card just got rejected in front of clients." I stared at the words on my phone and pictured it instantly. The quick laugh he always used when he felt cornered, the scramble for another card, the red creeping into his cheeks while he pretended it was just a mistake. Except this time, it wasn't. I had already frozen the accounts, and for a man who measured his worth by appearances, it was the smallest cut that drew the deepest blood. From that moment on, I knew each step had to be deliberate. I didn't need shouting matches or dramatic scenes. My silence and preparation were enough. I met with my lawyer again, tightening the plan and documenting every transaction Marcus had made with Tessa: dinners, hotel stays, even gifts. Each receipt was another thread I pulled from the image he had worked so hard to sew. It wasn't about vengeance anymore. It was about balance, making sure the years of sacrifice I had poured into him would not be erased by his betrayal. News of his unraveling began to circle back faster than I expected. One of his colleagues saw him and Tessa arguing in the office parking lot, her hands flying as she shouted, his face red with frustration. Another friend told me she had heard whispers that his promotion was under review, not because of performance, but because no company wanted the stain of scandal shadowing their leadership. I listened, nodded, and let the information settle. I didn't need to spread the word Marcus was unraveling all on his own. At home, Molly's resilience carried me forward. She adjusted better than I feared, accepting our smaller routines without complaint. One night, as I tucked her in, she looked up at me and said, "As long as we're together, it's fine." Those simple words reminded me why I was doing all of this. Every late night gathering documents, every meeting with my attorney, every cold silence I gave Marcus. It was all for her to protect the life she deserved. Marcus didn't handle the silence well. When his calls went unanswered, his messages turned frantic, switching from rage to desperation in the same breath. Eventually, he showed up again, this time at Jenna's house, pounding on the door like he had the right to demand entry. David met him at the front step, standing solid, his voice calm but unyielding. "You need to leave, Marcus," he warned. I watched from upstairs, holding Molly close as Marcus paced on the sidewalk, muttering and pulling at his hair. He shouted that I was ruining him, that I was turning everyone against him. But even from behind the glass, I could see the truth settling in. He was destroying himself, and I had simply stepped out of the way. The real confrontation came not long after. Jenna had invited us for a quiet family dinner, promising a night of normalcy for the children. The table was set, spaghetti steaming, laughter beginning to return. Then the front door swung open without warning. Marcus strode in, wearing one of his tailored suits that now looked tired at the edges. And trailing behind him was Tessa, her smile sharp as she slipped off her coat, as if she belonged at my sister's table. The room fell silent. Jenna's jaw tightened. David muttered under his breath, and Molly froze mid-bite. I rose slowly from my chair, my pulse steady even as the anger climbed. "Family," I asked Marcus, my voice calm but cutting. "You brought your mistress to my sister's house and dared to use that word?" Molly was ushered quietly into the kitchen by Jenna, and I stood face to face with the man who once swore he would never betray me. Marcus tried to explain, stumbling over half sentences, but I didn't let him. I pulled out my phone and tapped the screen, sliding it across the table. One by one, the photos appeared, hotel receipts, messages, even a selfie he had once sent Tessa from a hotel bed, not realizing it was synced to our shared cloud. Tessa's face drained as she leaned forward, reading proof of every lie. "What receipts?" she hissed at him, her eyes narrowing. His hand shot out to grab my phone, but I pulled it back. "Afraid she'll see the other woman too?" I asked. The gasp in the room was louder than his excuses. Tessa recoiled, her fury boiling over. "You told me she was the only thing standing in our way," she spat. Her voice carried down the hallway where Molly waited, but the damage was already done. Marcus froze, caught between both of us, his mask slipping further with every second. Tessa shoved her purse over her shoulder, her voice shaking as she muttered, "I won't ruin my reputation for this." Then she stormed out, slamming the door so hard the frames rattled on the wall. The silence that followed was heavier than any shouting match. Marcus stood alone, his shoulders slumped, his eyes darting around as if searching for an exit that no longer existed. "You wanted to play the big man?" I said quietly, my voice steady. "But you're not a prize, Marcus. You're a warning." And tonight, everyone saw it. Jenna's face flushed with anger as she stepped forward. "Get out!" She snapped, her voice sharper than I'd ever heard it. David blocked the door until Marcus finally shuffled out. His head bowed, his once confident stride reduced to a shuffle of defeat. When the door closed behind him, I sank into my sister's arms, the strength I had held on to, finally breaking enough for me to tremble. But even through the shaking, I knew something had shifted. My quiet steps were no longer in the shadows. They were visible, undeniable, and irreversible. Marcus had always relied on controlling the narrative, but now I was the one holding the receipts. That night, as I lay awake listening to the soft breaths of children down the hall, I realized there was no more space for hesitation. The world was beginning to see Marcus for who he truly was, and it wasn't my burden to protect his image anymore. My burden was gone, replaced by clarity and resolve. Marcus didn't stay quiet after the scene at Jenna's dinner table. Within days, his side of the story started appearing online. He wrote a long post on his professional page talking about betrayal inside his own home and the difficulty of balancing work with family. He never used my name, but his meaning was clear. He wanted the world to believe that I had turned on him out of spite, that I was vindictive and unstable. For a few hours, I worried that people might believe it, that they'd nod along with his words and whisper behind my back. But something happened that Marcus never anticipated. Those who had been in the ballroom weeks earlier began to share their own accounts. One colleague posted a picture of him and Tessa together at a happy hour, his hand far too familiar on her back. Another shared screenshots of text messages Marcus had accidentally sent to the wrong person, bragging about upgrading his life. The comments piled up, dismantling the image he was so desperate to protect. His narrative crumbled faster than he could patch it. By the end of the week, a phrase from that night at Jenna's house resurfaced. Someone who had been there repeated the words I had spoken to him. "You humiliated yourself." I just turned on the light. The line struck a chord, and before long, it was being quoted, repeated, and even turned into a hashtag. Lights. Marcus began as a quiet joke among his co-workers, then spread wider. Strangers used it to call out their own stories of betrayal, attaching his name to a movement that made him the symbol of dishonesty. I didn't have to add fuel. The fire spread on its own. One evening, while Molly played on the floor, I sat with Jenna scrolling through news updates on my phone. A lifestyle blog had picked up the story, running a piece about Marcus's affairs and questionable expenses. The comments section was brutal, tearing apart every word he had tried to use in his defense. I closed the screen and set the phone aside. I didn't need to see his downfall unfold in real time. It was enough to know it was happening. Still, Marcus tried to fight. He called from unknown numbers, leaving voicemails that swung from begging to threats. "Elaine, please take it down," one message said, his voice breaking. "You don't know what you've done. They're destroying me." But I hadn't done this. He had. I had only stepped out of the shadows, and the spotlight had revealed what had always been there. The real blow came when whispers about his misuse of company funds began to surface. Expense reports, leaked hotel stays, dinners, even jewelry items all billed under his corporate account. The firm could no longer look away. Within days, Marcus was placed on leave while they reviewed the charges. He had spent years convincing others that he was indispensable, the rising star of finance. Now the same people who once praised him were quietly backing away, leaving him to fend for himself. Tessa disappeared from view soon after. A colleague told me she had been seen screaming at Marcus in the office parking lot, her voice carrying, as she accused him of ruining her reputation. By the end of that week, her social media was wiped clean, her name scrubbed from company events. She had moved on, leaving him with the wreckage. Meanwhile, I kept my focus steady. Every evening, I reviewed documents with my attorney, tightening the case for custody and assets. Every morning, I walked Molly to school, holding her hand, answering her questions as honestly as I could, without placing the weight of Marcus's mistakes on her small shoulders. The balance gave me strength, quiet stability at home, while chaos consumed him everywhere else. One night, I sat at Jenna's kitchen table while David sorted through school papers. My phone buzzed with another voicemail, Marcus's voice breaking through in sobs. "I'll do anything. I'll pay you anything. Just stop letting them destroy me." I pressed delete without hesitation. The man on the other end of the line wasn't someone I recognized anymore. He was a shadow of himself, and for once, I didn't feel responsible for carrying him back into the light. News traveled fast in Dallas, and soon even his own family began to distance themselves. His father, once his loudest supporter, issued a statement condemning dishonesty and financial misconduct, making it clear that Marcus's actions didn't represent the family name. I read it twice, hardly believing the same man who used to brag about Marcus's promotions at holiday dinners had cut him loose so publicly. By then, the damage was irreversible. His firm suspended his contracts, his colleagues kept their distance, and the whispers in every corner of the city no longer worked in his favor. He had become the cautionary tale he once mocked in others. And I, the woman he thought would quietly absorb every humiliation, stood on the other side, watching the walls close in. For years, I had been the invisible one, the quiet partner in the background of his success. Now, Marcus was the one fading into irrelevance, his voice drowned out by the evidence and the voices of those he had underestimated. And as his empire collapsed, I prepared for the next step, the courtroom, where silence would no longer be my weapon, but proof. The day we finally stepped into the courtroom, I felt a weight press on my shoulders, but it wasn't fear. It was the culmination of months of planning, gathering documents, and standing firm while Marcus scrambled. The courtroom itself was quiet, wood-paneled, and orderly. The kind of place where truth could no longer be spun into something else. I sat beside my attorney, Mr. Grant, my hands folded tightly in my lap, while Marcus stood across the room with his own counsel, his once confident frame diminished. The judge entered, her expression stern, but not unkind, and the proceedings began. Marcus's attorney tried immediately to paint me as unstable, as someone vindictive and emotional, seeking to tear down a husband who had provided for his family. I sat still, my face calm, while Mr. Grant waited for his turn. When he finally spoke, he placed the thick folder of evidence on the desk with deliberate weight. Bank statements, hotel bills, jewelry purchases, all charged to accounts that Marcus and I had once shared. The judge flipped through the pages, her expression tightening. Marcus leaned forward, attempting to explain. "Those were client dinners," he said quickly. "Networking events, business necessities." His voice cracked as he stumbled through each excuse. Mr. Grant interrupted, firmly pointing to receipts, where the same charges matched photos of Marcus with Tessa. The judge looked unimpressed, her gaze shifting from Marcus to the papers in front of her. "Mr. Porter," she said evenly, "you will need better explanations than this." Custody was next. And this time, I felt my chest rise with something like courage. I had documented every absence, every missed evening when Molly waited by the window for a father who never came home. Jenna testified as well, describing how many nights Molly had stayed with her while Marcus was traveling. My lawyer didn't need to embellish anything, the truth was already enough. The judge listened, nodding slowly, then delivered her decision. Full physical custody to me with Marcus limited to structured visitation until he could demonstrate stability. I saw it land on him like a blow he hadn't anticipated. His shoulders slumped, his face pale. Losing me was one thing, losing control of Molly was something else entirely. For the first time, he looked afraid in a way that wasn't about money or reputation. When it came to finances, Mr. Grant presented the paper trail of my mother's inheritance. Every dollar traced directly from the sale of her house in Oak Cliff to the down payment on our family home. Marcus's attempt to claim it had been commingled was cut off with documents that protected it entirely. That property was hers before this marriage, Mr. Grant said firmly. By law, it remains hers now. The judge agreed. That piece of my mother's legacy, the one I feared I had lost to Marcus's ambition, was mine again. By the end of the proceedings, the picture was clear. Half our assets were legally mine, but Marcus's portion was frozen while investigations into his misuse of company funds continued. The tailored suits and five-star restaurants he clung to would now have to be paid for with borrowed money. The courtroom didn't end with shouting or theatrics. It ended with the gavel striking once sharp and final, cutting through the last illusions he had tried to maintain. Outside the courthouse, Marcus's father approached me quietly. For years, he had sung Marcus's praises, boasting about his son's rise in finance. Now his voice was low, his words careful. "Elaine," he said, his eyes heavy. "I'm sorry. You deserved better. Molly deserved better." I didn't cry, and I didn't thank him. I only said, "I know," and walked away. Later, I heard he had cut Marcus off from the family trust, the final thread Marcus had depended on to rebuild. Even Marcus's brother, the one who had vouched for him at work, sent me a message afterward. "Don't feel guilty," he wrote. He did this to himself. I read it once and set the phone aside. Guilt wasn't mine to carry anymore. Marcus tried one last tactic in the weeks that followed, filing motions to delay the proceedings, stalling in hopes of cornering me into a settlement. But every time Mr. Grant was ready with precise counter-arguments. Months of preparation, every email saved, every expense tracked, every voicemail documented, all came together. The judge grew impatient with him. "Mr. Porter," she said firmly, "dragging this out will only increase your costs. My advice is to accept the consequences of your actions." By the end, Marcus wasn't just humiliated, he was dismantled. The family home was ordered sold, my share wired directly into my account. His portion dwindled quickly under the weight of legal fees and debts he could no longer cover. The car he once prized was repossessed. His contract with the firm was quietly terminated, their statement citing ethical concerns. The man who had built his life on image and control was now renting a furnished apartment off the highway, stripped of every illusion he once carried so proudly. And me, I didn't celebrate with champagne or victory speeches. I tucked Molly into bed at night, folded laundry, and signed the paperwork for a modest house where we could begin again. The whispers around Dallas shifted, no longer pitying me as the quiet, betrayed wife. Now people said something else. She stood up. She won. My name was no longer tied to his scandal, but to resilience, to survival. The last call I received from Marcus came from an unknown number. His voice broke through the receiver, low and weary. For a moment, I almost answered out of habit. But then I looked at Molly asleep in the next room, her face peaceful, free of his chaos. I let the phone buzz until it went silent. That was the closure he would never get from me. The last time I saw Marcus was on a rainy afternoon outside the courthouse. The storm rolled in quickly, rattling the windows, forcing people to huddle beneath umbrellas. He stood under the awning, his suit clinging to him in the downpour, shoulders hunched, as if the fabric itself was too heavy to carry. When he saw me, he tried to straighten his lips, pulling into a smile that never reached his eyes. "Elaine," he said softly, his voice nearly swallowed by the rain. "Thank you for coming." I folded my arms, careful not to step closer than I had to. He spoke of mistakes, of losing everything, of wanting another chance. His eyes darted to the ground when I reminded him it wasn't mistakes that had torn us apart. It was choices, deliberate and repeated. He reached out as if to touch my arm, and I stepped back, my voice calm but final. "You're the architect of your own destruction, Marcus." I just stopped holding up the walls. His face fell, and for the first time, I saw the truth sink in. There was nothing left for me to save. I turned and walked into the rain, each drop soaking into my hair and coat. But I felt lighter with every step. Behind me, there was no pleading, no footsteps trying to follow, only silence swallowed by the storm. That was the day I closed the door on us for good, not with anger, but with clarity. 2 years have passed since then. Life has settled into something steady, something honest. Molly is thriving. She's 9 now, tall and curious, asking questions about her future instead of questions about her father. I sit in the front row at her spelling bee, my hands clasped as she spells each word with confidence, her face glowing when the judge nods. She no longer waits by the window, no longer asks why he hasn't come home. She knows enough, and what she doesn't know, she doesn't miss. As for me, I've rebuilt piece by piece. I found a modest house not far from Jenna, and David painted the walls in soft colors that make the rooms feel warm, filled them with laughter that doesn't have to cover silence. I returned to my work one step at a time, growing into the rhythm of a life that feels wholly mine. Some days, I still wake up startled, remembering the years I gave to a man who spent them elsewhere. But when I hear Molly humming in the kitchen or see her reading on the porch, I know I gained more than I lost. I still hear whispers about Marcus from time to time. Dallas is a small city when it comes to reputation. I know he lost the apartment and now rents a 1-bedroom closer to downtown. I know the firm never took him back, and Tessa married someone else within a year. People mention his name in hushed voices, shaking their heads at how far he fell. But I don't linger on him. His story isn't mine to carry anymore. Storms used to terrify me. I hated the way thunder shook the windows, the way rain pressed down on the roof like it might break through. Now, when it rains, I find myself smiling. Molly once asked why, and I told her, because storms don't scare me anymore. I walked through one, and I came out stronger on the other side. That's the truth of it. His betrayal didn't ruin me, it refined me. It burned away the illusions I had clung to and left me standing in the clear. In the end, justice wasn't just about the courtroom or the papers signed. It was about reclaiming my dignity, my voice, and showing my daughter that silence can be strength and boundaries can be love. I didn't just survive what Marcus did, I built a life beyond it, and that's the lesson I carry now. Before we close, I'd love to know what part of this journey spoke most to you. Share your thoughts in the comments, and if you'd like to hear more true family stories, stay connected here.